Picture this. It's the 1970s, and the global economy is in total chaos. The old playbook, the one that had guided government since World War II, it suddenly just stopped working. And out of that crisis, a truly radical new theory emerged, one that would challenge just about everything economists thought they knew. This is the story of the new classical revolution. All right, let's dive in. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with the crisis that kicked this whole thing off. Then, we'll unpack the incredibly powerful idea at its core, the Lucas critique. After that, we'll break down the three main pillars holding up the whole theory and explore the wild conclusion it leads to about government policy. And of course, we'll weigh the good and the bad and finally see how this revolution still shapes how we think about the economy today. You see, for decades, one school of thought ran the show, Keynesian economics. The main idea was a pretty simple trade-off, almost like a dial on a machine. You could turn down unemployment, but you had to accept a little more inflation. Or you could turn down inflation, but unemployment would tick up. Governments thought they had it all figured out. But then the 1970s hit, and that dial just shattered. The world got slammed by something called stagflation. All of a sudden, countries were dealing with high inflation and high unemployment at the exact same time. Now, according to the economic models everyone was using, this was supposed to be impossible. It was like a physicist discovering that gravity could sometimes push things up. The old theories were broken, and this created a huge intellectual vacuum that a new generation of thinkers was more than ready to fill. And into this vacuum steps our main character, an economist from the University of Chicago named Robert E. Lucas, Jr. Now, Lucas wasn't just trying to patch up the old broken models. No. He argued that their entire foundation was flawed from the start, and he put forward a simple yet incredibly profound idea that we now call the Lucas critique.
So, what's the big deal here? Well, the old models treated people like cogs in a machine, assuming they'd always react the same way. But Lucas said, hold on a second, people are smart. We're forward-looking. So if the government announces, hey, we're going to spend a bunch of money to boost the economy, people don't just sit there, they think, oh, inflation's coming. So they immediately demand higher wages or raise their prices. And just like that, the government's policy gets neutralized before it even starts, making all those old predictions useless.
And you can really feel the struggle Lucas and his colleagues were going through in this quote. They were looking at their models, trying to square them with what thinkers like Milton Friedman were saying about expectations. They knew Friedman was right, but their models just couldn't account for it. He calls it a real scientific tension, and that's exactly what it was. It was that tension that forced him to say, okay, we need to start from scratch and build a new kind of economics, assuming that people are rational.
So if you're going to tear down the old house, you have to build a new one. Lucas and others built their new framework on a foundation of three core ideas, or pillars. And together they painted a radically different picture of how the economy actually works.
First up, rational expectations. This doesn't mean people have a crystal ball. It just means they use all the information they have to make the best possible forecast. They don't keep making the same dumb mistakes over and over. Second, market clearing. This is the idea that prices and wages are perfectly flexible. If there are unemployed workers, wages will fall instantly to a level where everyone who wants a job can get one. So in this world, there's no such thing as being forced into unemployment. And third, imperfect information. So if everyone's so rational and markets work perfectly, why do we have recessions? The answer is surprises, unexpected shocks. People might misread a situation and make a decision that creates a temporary boom or bust. The crucial point is that business cycles aren't a sign the market is broken. They're just rational people reacting to confusing information.
Now, if you take those three pillars and you put them all together, you arrive at a conclusion about government that is truly startling and, frankly, very controversial. It became known as the policy ineffectiveness proposition.
So, on the left, you have the traditional Keynesian idea. Government should be an activist, stepping in to fight recessions. But the new classical view on the right is the complete opposite. It says any predictable government policy is totally doomed to fail. This offered a new explanation for that 1970s stagflation. Governments kept trying to stimulate the economy, but people saw it coming, so it only led to more inflation, not more jobs.
So in this world, how can the government have any effect at all? The answer is one word: surprises. If the central bank suddenly hikes interest rates out of the blue, or the government pushes through an unexpected spending change, that can temporarily affect the economy. But a systematic, rule-based policy that everyone sees coming, according to the theory, it's completely powerless.
As you can imagine, this was a powerful and elegant theory, but it was also met with some pretty intense criticism. So let's step back and assess it.
How has the new classical school actually held up over time?
Well, its strengths were huge. It made macroeconomics way more rigorous, forcing models of the whole economy to be built from the ground up on the decisions of individual people and firms. That was a game changer. And it made expectations a permanent part of the conversation. But the weaknesses were also pretty significant. That whole idea that unemployment is always voluntary just struck many as totally at odds with reality. And maybe the biggest blow came from its own predictions. The theories suggested that ending inflation should be almost painless if you just announced it clearly. Well, when the US and UK tried that in the early 80s, it caused deep, costly recessions, which was a direct challenge to the theory.
So, if its big policy ideas were so heavily challenged, what's the ultimate legacy of the new classical revolution? Well, the answer is fascinating. It's not that they won the debate, it's that they fundamentally changed the rules of the debate for everyone. Here's the best way to think about it. The new classical school didn't win the war, but it invented the weapons that every side uses now. While most economists today don't believe that predictable policies are completely useless, almost all of them use the tools and methods that the new classical school created. The real revolution was in the methodology. This all led to what's often called the new Keynesian synthesis. Basically, economists who still believed markets weren't perfect adopted the new classical toolkit. They took the good parts, like rational expectations, but rejected the idea that prices and wages are perfectly flexible. Instead, they now use these rigorous models to study why prices and wages are sticky in the real world. For example, a modern model can explain the slow recovery after the 2008 financial crisis by showing how sticky wages kept the job market from bouncing back quickly, something a pure new classical model would struggle with. So in a strange twist, the revolution's tools were adopted by its opponents to build today's consensus.
And that brings us to today. The consensus that was born out of those intellectual battles of the 70s and 80s has been dominant for decades. But as we face a whole new set of massive global challenges, pandemics, climate change, you name it, it begs the question, is the current way of thinking enough? Or is the world of economics once again ripe for a new revolution?